Okay, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about how Booktube has changed my reading. Now, I think pretty much everyone who has a Booktube video has noticed that some changes occur in their reading life once they start making videos actively on this platform. Some of these changes may be positive, some not so much, but I just wanted to take some time to sit and reflect on how this last maybe year and a half has really affected the way that I consume books. The first thing I want to talk about is the amount that I read. The volume of the books that I consume every month has increased drastically since I started making videos actively. I did watch Booktube passively for a couple years before I actively started making videos, and at that point I used it more as like a source of recommendations for me to pick up my next book, but I only watched some of the bigger booktubers and just kind of took whatever came my way. But now that I'm actively making videos, I am seeking out specific creators who I know and I trust their taste in books and know that it matches mine. And that gives me so many more books to choose from. And also, as a result, increases how much I read every month, because I want to, one, have content to be able to create, and two, have so many more books that I want to get to that are on my radar that I have to be reading constantly in order to even get close to completing my TBR. That's never going to happen, let's just be honest, but I can try. This is also something that my husband has commented on and said that he's seen a huge difference in the time that I spend reading. So I did read, a lot before. I always have, but he did notice a huge change in my priorities, where instead of watching a movie or sitting down to stream something on Netflix, I would pick up a book instead. So I don't see this as a negative thing at all. I think that this is a beautiful change that's happened in my life. And I've read so many more good stories because the volume that I'm consuming has increased. There is, of course, a negative side to this change, which is being worried that you're not going to have enough read by the end of the month for a wrap-up. Now, I know some people have kind of dealt with this in their own way, where they decide to make, seasonal wrap-ups or not necessarily monthly schedules, and I think that that's a really good way to handle this stress. But I think that pretty much anyone who makes Booktube videos knows the stress or the worry that comes with, oh, do I have enough read this month to be able to talk about it? So there is a negative side to kind of the increase in volume, but overall, I would say that this is a positive change that I've noticed. The next thing I've noticed is how I track my reading, or the fact that I track it all. I wasn't even aware of Goodreads until I think a year before I started making videos. And I had this moment, this light bulb moment, like there's a place where I can put the books that I've read, And I remember trying to go back and put in all the books that I read like in high school and all the years before in university. There's no way I would remember all of those or when I read them, but I had so much fun with the concept of being able to track those things. So as someone who's a planner, I like organizing. I love putting things, where they belong. This has been a huge help in my development in my reading career. So I love the fact that I track on Goodreads. I did try to keep a reading journal, but not just reading journals, but journals in general. I'm so gung-ho when I start them, and then within 2 to 3 months, I forget they exist. So I do have a reading journal that I started at the beginning of last year, I think, and hell if I know where that went. I do want to keep a little bit of a physical record though, because God forbid Goodreads crashes. I would like to have a record of everything that I've read. So I do keep a short list of just the name of the book and the star rating that I give it. But when it comes to tracking how many pages I read and stuff, I don't do that outside of Goodreads. But it's something that I thoroughly enjoy, and I'm really glad that I've kind of discovered my own pattern and what works for me in tracking my reading through making Booktube videos. Another huge change is how I pick the books I read, or the books that I choose to read. So one of the big changes has been a focus or an awareness of authors of color. So this is something that I didn't really have before. I would read books by authors of color, but not consciously, and it was when they happened to cross my path. But once I started making videos and realizing the conversations that we have going on in our community about this stuff, I started realizing how important it is to choose to diversify your reading selection, not necessarily just let it happen. So this is a huge change that I've noticed, where I seek out the stories of those who are marginalized or those who may not get the spotlight. And I think this is a really good change in my reading habits. I've learned so many things through reading stories about experiences and lives that I will never get to experience. I only live one life, right? Through a certain intersection of identities. So to be able to explore different intersections of those things through stories has been so good for my personal development. And I think it's really necessary for communication in the future, for empathy in the future. And I really encourage those who haven't taken an active role in this to do so, because it's only enriched my life, truly. Another aspect of my book selection that's become more important, it's more recent actually, is self-published books. So I am a huge fantasy nerd. I'm sure you can see from, the shelf behind me and from, just what I read on my channel. But I haven't gotten into self-published books pretty much ever in my life, but there are some amazing books out there on the market from people who wrote a story that was in their heart and made sure it went out into the world. So I've really recently been adding a lot of self-published books to my TBR, and I want to prioritize those. I think that could add a lot of diversification of types of storytelling, because I'm sure there are types of storytelling that traditional publishing prefers, or through the editing process might edit out some more unique ways of telling a story. And I'm interested to get into some more self-pub books where the author gets to tell the story exactly the way that they want to tell it. So I'm very excited to kind of crack open this new aspect of, books that I pick to read in the future. Next for books that I pick is anticipated releases. Now, this is something that I just wasn't on my radar. I never looked at books that are coming out soon unless it was part of a series that I was already reading. The concept of looking forward to something that's going to be released and researching that yourself before PR teams make you aware it's coming out was very new to me when I first started making videos. It allows this kind of new excitement to creep into reading where, when people get trailers for movies and they're excited to see the next Avengers come out, I didn't have that feeling with books before, but now I do, where I'm like, oh, the next in this series that I love is going to be coming out, or this new book that sounds awesome is going to be coming out. And it gives me this hype feeling that I'm really enjoying, where I can pick books to add to my TBR from anticipated lists. And finally, I've seen a large increase in the amount of adult fantasy and hard-hitting contemporary fiction that I pick up. So when I talk about adult fantasy, I did read adult fantasy and I liked it, but a lot of the bigger channels or the bigger recommendations that I was watching before I made videos were YA fantasy. A lot of the book boxes, the PR, campaigns are for YA fantasy. So I was reading more of that. But as soon as I discovered people on Booktube talking about adult fantasy and their anticipated releases for adult fantasy, and if you like this book, you might like this book, I discovered this whole new world that matches me a lot better than YA fantasy, I think. Adult fantasy is my lifelong love. It is my reading soulmate, and I will never get tired of it. And Booktube has played a huge part in me discovering that and what I like in this particular genre. So that was definitely a huge change I noticed. Also, I don't read contemporary. It's just not interesting to me. I live in this world. I don't need to read more about this world. But there is a subgenre in that genre that I've discovered through Booktube that I love, which is hard-hitting contemporary fiction. So these are books that deal with heavy issues that may weigh heavy on your heart or change your perspective on things, or like I mentioned earlier in this video, allow you to engage with a story or an experience you don't have in your life. And those types of stories that usually either make me cry or make my heart feel heavy, but in a good way, those types of contemporary fiction I love. And I would not have discovered that through Booktube because I don't have any interest in any of the kind of lighter aspects of that genre. So I'm very thankful for, this platform for being able to show me that this is a genre that I would be remiss to look over. Another slightly negative thing that I've noticed, though, is there is so much discourse about the morality of book choices that it kind of paralyzes you when you want to go pick up a book. So I do think that discourse on book Twitter and, calling out people who are doing things that are truly harmful is a good trend that I'm seeing. But the level to which people micro pick some of these issues leaves you feeling like, okay, I feel like if I pick any book, there's going to be something wrong with either the author or the book itself or its content. And I'm not saying there's nothing left to read. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. I think that this conversation is more nuanced than that. But I definitely do think that there is something to feeling paralyzed as a reader, that any choice you make is going to be a bad choice. And that the sort of fun aspect of reading can feel like it's disappearing. So I have felt that throughout making videos, where I feel like the joy that I was getting from it has been lessened by some of the discourse that I've seen. And I don't think I'm alone in feeling that throughout the process of making videos on this platform, where you feel like you want things to change for the better, but you can't help but feel, I can't think of another word, but paralyzed and stuck and not knowing what to choose to read next, or where the joy went in what you had been reading. It can be something that weighs heavy on you. So I think that this is a very nuanced conversation that can't be A or B. It's just impossible. There are a lot of net positives to the discussions that we're having, on whatever the platform may be, whether it's Twitter, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram. I'm not on Instagram like ever, but I've heard, discussions are happening there as well. There are a lot of net positive and changes that need to happen, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there can be some negative ripples from these things, where, reading starts to lose its glimmer or its joy. So that's something that I have noticed in the last, year and a half that I've been on Booktube. And it's something that I think all of us need to have a nuanced conversation about, be honest with ourselves and our friends about, and just be open to a discussion on how that can affect our personal relationship with reading. The last thing I want to talk about is reading habits. How has the way that I read changed from being on this platform? The first one is reading sprints. When I was more of a passive watcher of Booktube, I never participated in reading sprints or even individually timed myself for reading sprints, when I was reading. But now that I make videos, I have friends that do live reading sprints all the time. I've done them myself. I find myself incorporating this not only into reading, but like doing my homework or studying or doing work. I take this sprint mindset of 20 minutes doing this, 20 minutes doing this. And it really helps me get a lot of shit done. Before Booktube, I was more of a page number person. So, okay, I'm going to do this many pages of homework. I'm going to read this many pages of my book and then I'm done, rather than a time limit type of person. But I think the time is more steady. It allows me to keep things at a regular pace, because if I say I'm going to read 100 pages of my book and do 2 pages of homework, there's something here that's a little off kilter. But nowadays it's a bit more even, 40 minutes of work, 40 minutes of reading. And I think that's really helped revolutionize the way that I read. The next discovery I had was audiobooks. Audiobooks are the fucking yes. I love them so much. Some books are better consumed as audiobooks, And I really hate when people look down on those who are consuming audiobooks, because I find myself doing that a little bit myself, actually. Like, oh, you've consumed more audiobooks this month than physical books. What a terrible reader you are. And it's just so dumb. I hate that I find myself doing that. But I think that comes from the general way that people tend to look at audiobooks. And I wish we as a collective would stop doing that. It allows you to consume stories that you want to while you have other things to do. Or for me, while I'm in transit, I do it all the time. I ride my bicycle, so I can't be reading a book while I'm doing that, but I can be listening to an audiobook. And I have discovered that audiobook is my favorite way to consume thrillers. And I wouldn't have discovered that without Booktube, because Booktube really opened my eyes to the world of audiobooks. And also very closely connected with audiobooks is the applications that I now use to consume books and stories. Two of the main ones being Libby and Scribd. These two applications have changed my life. Scribd usually has a wider selection than my library, but there's also a limit on how much you can consume. So I usually will take some of the more popular books that aren't available at my library yet, and I'll access them through Scribd, either by downloading the physical book or by listening to the audiobook. Also, that download function has been key for me, because who's trying to use data while you're commuting? So just being able to download that data and play it at any point in time has been wonderful. And then with Libby, the online access that I have to my library has been life-changing. I live in Japan. I can't go to my physical library. I can't go to physical English bookstores where I live. They're not available. So without Libby, I would be lost, because I can't buy every book I'm interested in, like your girl ain't rich like that. So these two applications and audiobooks kind of all lumped together have really, really changed my reading world for the absolute better. And the final thing under this umbrella of reading habits is buddy reads. I have recently, actually, probably in the last, 6 to 7 months, discovered the joy of buddy reads. I don't have friends in my personal life that read like I do. I think a lot of us have that, as an experience, and that's why we start a Booktube channel. But I truly don't have people, in my physical world that read like I do. And to be able to read the same book at the same time as someone else who wants to be doing that and having reactions together, especially if you're in sync with each other, is just a level of joy that I had not experienced while reading before. Of course, buddy reads aren't easy. The timing isn't easy to keep. People get busy, you get out of sync, things like that. But when it goes right, it really goes right. I had this incredible buddy read with Yasmin over on Yasmin Be Reading for Rhythm of War, and that was my first time experiencing a Stormlight Archive book at the same time as someone else, and it completely transformed my experience. So yeah, buddy reads have done a lot to transform the way that I interact with stories. That concludes how Booktube has changed my reading. Let me know in the comments down below if you've had some of these similar experiences, similar changes to your reading, if you've had some different ones. I'd love to chat with you guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. It really helps me with the algorithm, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Ja ne!